I'm Sophie and this is 10-Minute Myth. Atop the Acropolis in the Attica region of the Greek mainland sits the world-famous Parthenon, and on its western edge, a pediment once depicted a great contest, that of Athena and Poseidon for the patronage of the city that would become Athens. Spoiler alert, Athena wins, which is why the city isn't called Poseidonia. The myth of this contest has been told, reimagined, and morphed over time, and while the core of the myth remains unchanged, the lack of an early narrative account is responsible for some detail, such as how the winner was decided and how Poseidon chose to respond, tending to differ depending on who is telling the story. The most common version of the myth can be seen in Jenny March's simplified version, where Athena vied with Poseidon to be patron of the city during the reign of Cecrops, both demonstrating their powers, Poseidon by creating a well of seawater on the Acropolis, Athena by planting an olive tree. Athena's gift was judged the greater benefit, and thereafter she was Athens' special patron. Harris and Platzner comically described the choice of offerings as Athena giving the gift of a domestic olive tree, the fruit and oil of which eventually became the city's chief exports and source of economic prosperity, whereas Poseidon, somewhat cluelessly, produced only a saltwater spring. Of note is that they attributed the decision of Athena's victory to a vote by the citizens, which is the more common version of the myth. Alternatively, drawing on Apollodorus' interpretation, written around 400 years after the completion of the Parthenon, Mark Daniels' version of the myth involves 12 gods presiding over the contest and awarding the victory to Athena on behalf of the Athenian citizens, much to Poseidon's dismay. Daniels acknowledges that in some editions of the myth, including Apollodorus', the sea god chose to flood the Attic plain with salt water in revenge, while in other versions, there's no mention of Poseidon's response. While there are disputed aspects of the myth that have changed over multiple retellings, its existence upon the West Pediment is for certain. Although the majority of the pediment statues have long since been damaged after the Parthenon was converted into a church and then hit by Venetian cannon fire in 1687 before finally being looted in later years. Only a few pieces remain, and most can be found either here in the British Museum in London or in the New Acropolis Museum, situated in the shadow of the summit itself. Although the original statues are long gone, recovered vase paintings, artist recreations, and sketches such as those attributed to Jacques Carré from 1674 help us to imagine the scene within the larger context of the Parthenon and its position on the Acropolis. When arriving at the summit, visitors pass through the propylaea and approach the Parthenon to immediately be greeted by the West Pediment in the gable of the roof above the metopes. In the largest part of the pediment, directly in the centre, Athena faced off against Poseidon, the maiden goddess on the left, the sea god on the right, both brandishing their traditional weapons of spear and trident. Thomas Secoulis explains that on either side of the deities, they were framed by two active groups of horses pulling chariots, while a crowd of legendary personalities from Athenian mythology fills the space out to the acute corners of the pediment, and Connolly draws on sketches to further describe the scene. She writes of Athena's chariot driven by Nike, foretelling her victory, and Poseidon's by a female figure who must be his wife, the Nereid Amphitrite. At Poseidon's feet would have been the saltwater spring, and behind the two deities, in the centre of the scene, would have been the olive tree. We know this because of vase paintings from the 4th century that were inspired by the Parthenon sculptures, despite the fact that no carving of the tree has ever been recovered from the remaining fragments of the West Pediment. The rest of the scene is more difficult to identify, although many classicists agree with Babette Stanley Spaeth's assessment that the remaining people on either side of the chariots are members of the Athenian and Eleusinian royal families. The two families stand behind and on the side of their deity, the Athenians obviously with Athena and the Eleusinians with Poseidon. These two groups are described by Spaeth as resting and watching the action play out in the centre of the pediment. Additionally, standing between the chariots and the royal families were the two messenger gods, Hermes and Iris, preparing to spread forth the news of the contest's winner. So now that we understand the myth and how it was presented on the Parthenon, the question is, why is this the myth that was portrayed on the West Pediment? On the opposite end of the building, perched above the entry to the temple, the East Pediment told the story of Athena's birth, when, according to myth, the maiden goddess sprung, fully formed and armed, from Zeus's forehead. It is the contents of the two pediments in combination that is important, as unlike with the metopes and frieze pieces, the scenes depicted on the pediments focus solely on Athena as the patron of the city. The focus on Athena in the pediment scenes tells us a lot about the Athenian people at the time of the Parthenon's construction in the 5th century BC. Athena was not only the patron goddess of Athens, but she was also believed to be the mother of all Athenians. The people of Athens are said to be descended from their king, Erichthonius, also referred to as Erechtheus, who was mythically the son of the maiden goddess. According to myth, Erichthonius was born after the lame god Hephaestus made advances on Athena, and when she refused him, he spilled his seed on her thigh. In response, Athena wiped it off her thigh with a piece of wool, throwing it on the ground, impregnating Gaia, the Mother Earth, from which Erichthonius was born. Like many births involving deities, Athena was not a mother in the traditional sense of carrying a child within her, but her role in the conception and her choice to raise the child made her Erichthonius' mother and further cemented the link between the Athenian people and their goddess. Not only was she their patron, she was also their maternal figure and a significant aspect of their identity. These two myths of the contest and of Erichthonius' birth clearly link Athena to the sacred summit as the location of where she not only won patronage of the city, but where she raised her son, who would go on to father the Athenian people. Through this link, the Athenian people are permanently allied with Athena, just as Athena is eternally associated with the city. Together, the pediments tell the origin of the city, first through the birth of their patron and mother, and then through the birth of the city itself. However, there is discussion among classicists as to whether the contest was actually an interpretation of conflict between the cults of Athena and Poseidon, as opposed to between the deities themselves. We will not be exploring this theory, and we will instead be looking at what the belief in this contest tells us about the Athenians, as they believed this myth was more than just a story to give their city an origin. It was considered by the ancient Athenians to have been a very real event in their history, with physical evidence in the form of Poseidon's trident marks and Athena's olive tree. Whether they were long ago placed there to support the myth, or whether the myth was created to explain their existence on the Acropolis, is irrelevant to this discussion, as the Athenians truly believed that this contest took place, and in response to that belief, they viewed the olive tree and the trident marks as sacred objects with intense reverence. The West Pediment not only tells us about how ancient Athenians viewed Athena, but it also tells us about the relationship they had with Poseidon. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, versions of the myth depicted on the West Pediment vary, and the two key variations of the contest that matter when it comes to Poseidon are who chose the winner and how he responded to the verdict. In the version of the myth put forward by Harris and Platzner, the people of Athens were the ones to award the victory to Athena, which led to Poseidon furiously flooding Attica in revenge. This is of note, as they also theorise that this version of the myth explains why Athens, after it became the world's first democracy, denied suffrage to its women. According to a 5th century AD interpretation, Poseidon lost by only one vote, which was cast by a woman. In response, the men of Athens deprived women of the right to vote, in an effort to placate Poseidon's wrath, and appeasing the sea god would have been of incredible importance given Athens' seafaring culture. In this way, the contest myth not only served the purpose of venerating Athena, but was also used by the men of the city to strip women of their power and citizenship status in a way that could be defended as being in the best interest of Athens as a whole. In Parker's interpretation, Poseidon was enraged at the verdict and began to flood the Thriacian plain until ordered by Zeus to desist. And in this version, as with many others, the power of the chief god is shown to side with Athens, a powerful moment that would have allowed the Athenians to show their reverence for Zeus, in addition to his brother and daughter in one of the city's most important mythologies. At the end of the day, when trying to understand the impact and significance of the Parthenon on ancient Athenians, we must remember that its primary role was as a deeply sacred space, which acted as a physical manifestation of the connection between the city, its people, and its goddess. Thank you for watching 10-Minute Myth, and join us next time where we discuss Lord Elgin and the Parthenon sculptures. We would like to thank the following sources for the information used in this video.